часов последних.
Да, главное, что спикеры. Там последний я сказала, да, предупреждение последний. Нет, это нет. Я уже какой-то кино буду ставить сумочки в сером костюмчике. Я смотрю, проблем не возникло, да, потому что мы все беспокоиться. Что у вас бейджик? У меня не было бейджика. Может, он вам и не нужен? Я его добыла. А, добыли? Ага, бейджик я сюда не вошла. Просто у меня не было, почему-то не было ни в списках, нигде. Леша правильно беспокоился, потому что он звонил. Я не знала, как попасть сюда, здесь все было перекрыто. Поскольку мы уже, да. Я просто просила его, потому что я думала, что я буду опаздывать, и просила, чтобы кто-то меня с бейджем встретил по возможности, чтобы мне не тратить время на эту процедуру. Значит, спиной в сером стоит Чистухин, справа от него в синем костюме Чистухин Арбан Россия.
Знаете, я сейчас как сделаю? Ну, во-первых, я их буду представлять все равно по списку, а не по этому.
Ну да. Единственное, что надо вычеркнуть. А так чисто зрительно,
Я убрала специально, чтобы не было слышно.
Вы наш модератор, да? Владимир Чистюхин. Ну что, кто-то будет еще, кроме меня? Или мы вдвоем?
Как минимум втроем. Дмитрий Янин Чученко даже. Уже даже оставил свой портфель.
Что?
Уже даже оставил
даже там
свой
где-то
портфель.
Ну все, тогда все нормально. Боксом с человеком, оба портфель. Сам Юрий Викторович Воронин. Ох ты мой. Кларочка, какое счастье. Так, все. Ну ладно, вовремя к вам подошли, и все стало налаживаться сразу.
Большое.
Все на месте, да?
Дамы и господа, я предлагаю занимать места в зале и в президиуме. Нам пора начинать.
Я свое место занял. Да, здравствуйте.
Куда вам еще? Куда вам деваться? Куда вам? Я ровно таким же методом. Но я еще смотрю, куда микрофон выхватывает.
В контексте.
Так, все на месте, кроме Алексея Владимировича, да? Он обещал подойти во время дискуссии.
Alexei promised to come during discussion. I am happy to welcome all the participants and guests of our session, Enhancing of Financial Culture and Insurance Culture, How to Increase the Quality of Insurance Service. And I'm happy to introduce participants of our meeting. Moiseev Alexei is coming in a few minutes. Deputy Minister of Finance Ruskov Alexei, the head of the Department of Consumer Rights of Central Service of Federal Service, Deputy Head of Central Bank of Russia, Head of Financial Services Ufimtsev Evgeny, Vice President of Russian Union of Insurance Companies, Executive Director of Russian Union of Automobile Insurance Companies, Yanin Dmitry, Chair of the Board of International Confederation of Consumers and Head of Insurance Companies, Scientific and Research Financial Institute of Ministry of Finance of Russia, and Purtov Kirill, Deputy Head of Department of State Property of Moscow. Kirill Sergeyevich, good afternoon and happy to meet you. So we are going to discuss conditions for development of insurance market in Russia, and today the market is developing, as we normally say, by extensive way at a low level of insurance benefits in the structure of economy, in the structure of the GDP. Still we have an open question for the search of golden middle between rentability for insurance companies and payability and readiness of consumers to pay some money so that to protect themselves from something to happen. And there is open data, there are open sources of different audit companies which have some forecasts, and I believe they are quite anxious for insurance companies. For 2018, every fifth insurance company can leave the market. It depends with the increase of requirements of Bank of Russia and new regulatory requirements, and it is also connected with conditions of availability of insurance services and with the offers. And let's speak about it. And I would like to address the first question to Yuri Viktorovich Voronin. On 3rd of September, federal law about potence of consumer protection, which presupposes the creation of financial institution and should actually simplify the argument solution in pre-court order. So how do you view developments and tasks at this new position? Good afternoon, dear colleagues. Thank you, Evelina, for your question and for this opportunity to present principal and new institution for our regulatory institution as consumer of financial services. I believe that my colleagues already studied this law and there is no need to reproduce it anyhow, but I would like to mention that it's possible to consider this institute in a very objective and independent manner, because I didn't participate in preparation of this law. I was involved into other issues during that time, and I didn't imagine that my destiny will bring me here. But nevertheless, I believed and I still believe that
it's not only a necessary institution, but this is an institution that we really waited for. This is not the one who is responsible for complaints of civilians, of citizens, even though these institutions are also required. I mean, those who protect human rights and children's rights, and please do not mix it, even though the word is used everywhere as a ready-made word. There is, well, we don't have any analog to this position, which come to force with the law since 3rd of September. This is an institution of pre-court a solution of arguments between physical bodies and financial organization of suppliers of financial services. And the target of this institution, it could be a quite different treatment of this order. The target is to increase the level of consideration of a very professional, very specific ideas, because we do respect court and those who take positions of federal judges, but of course lawyers as well as doctors have their own specialization. Well, there is no universal doctor who can cure all illnesses and diseases, so that is why they're trained specifically. So you cannot be a unique specialist in all areas, but these kind of arguments and these kind of conflicts and complaints require a very professional and deep consideration. So those authorized people who are going to create the main bunch of this service for different financial institutions, so those employees who are going to be involved into their work, they will be high professionals, I do hope, and they will be qualified and objectively considering the issues. On the other hand, there is a myth that the court order is the most perfect and humanity didn't invent anything better. But now, actually, we consider it in a different way. Of course, court is the upper instance where we can get addressed to search for the truth. And there is kind of inertia in time, quite a complicated procedure, necessary payment addressed there, and the principle of competitiveness, of competition, even though it seems to be quite universal, but in relations between organization and the human is not always suitable, because competition can be between equal parties. And when on one side we have a consumer who is inexperienced in problem of financial market and qualified organizations with money and special staff, well, this competition turns into different idea. And here we don't need a competition, but actually the instance responsible for argument consideration should help understand human rights to the person, to protect the weaker part of this argument. And actually, the authorized institute helps to solve this collision. We do not substitute for court. Court has its own competence, but this is additional instance between a person addressing to financial organization to get a resolution to the complaint before he goes to court. And if the idea that was implemented by the developers in the law, so the main part of most typical arguments and complaints which are directed to court, they will be considered at the level of authorized institution. And there are two kinds of entering. The first one is obligatory one, but it's also possible to enter voluntarily without waiting for the turn of institution. And I believe that this, in my opinion, will increase the level of trust of the participants of financial market, in particular insurance companies, because the law starts with insurance, with automobile insurance, and they will be the first participants of this law. And it's out of the question that voluntarily entering this organization will be an image task, and this will contribute to creation of trust of people, and the order of consideration of the argument will be very quick, and the very limited time frame established by the law, 15 days to financial organization, 15 days to ombudsman, and they have clear-cut mechanism of performing the decision which is taken, actually the right to provide the executive list, and now they have this potential as well, and it's quite efficient because it's a professional instance, and in case financial organization does not agree with this decision taken for the benefit of a physical body, then when the argument is directed to court, and of course a financial organization can reconsider this decision. This will be the process between financial organization and ombudsman service, and not a physical body, which actually works for the idea of protecting rights of the weakest party in this argument. So occurrence of the system of right protection, which is quite fast, efficient, and not by competition principle, but precise following of the rules described in law and obligations described in law, works for the idea which is dedicated to the round table where we are present today. Well, I'm limited by that, but I can speak infinitely. Well, thank you, Yuri Viktorovich. I would like to add about organization, as the participants of our panel are responsible for separate territories. This format does not presuppose discussions. That is why I will provide the floor for speech, and then we'll switch to Q&A session. So, how urgent the implementation of expansion of this mechanism as a pre-court management of arguments will be explained by Oleg Vladimirovich Prusakov. As according to the data of court statistics, the courts considered 381,000 of civil deals connected with insurance. This is 3% of all the civil cases, and for arbitrage it is 133,000. What can you tell about the character of these claims, about dynamics and the solution of the situation? Of course, this is overload for court. Well, thank you very much for your question. Good afternoon, all the participants. And from the position of Rospotrebnadzor, the theme of insurance has its own specific feature, which is which consists in the fact that at some stage, at human rights protection of financial market, we've faced some kind of transformation of activity of citizens. For quite a long time, we had a priority of complaints of citizens and all the spectrum of administrative and our influence over financial sector was related to consumer credits, consumer loans, and now this accent is switched to insurance services, and this was quite unexpected to some extent, because basic amount of complaints was related to situations which were not in violation of consumers' rights as it is after they performed a deal or non-performed obligations and liabilities, but in the area of inability to make the agreement of obligatory automobile insurance, and we can't even imagine that it can exist in our market, which is not so uncivilized as we could believe. And today, considering and assessing the structure of citizens' claims, and kind of indicator is the situation which our new hotline faced, which was open last year at the end of October at financial explanation. So it was free for our citizens, and so all the claims that we could hear at this line, new source of information, described in the situation in quite interesting manner. So every fifth call is related to insurance sphere, and the questions are in the area which can be distributed to some initial stage of development of our financial market and insurance services in particular. For example, citizens ask questions which, in my opinion, are not right to be asked today from the point of view of development of our market, a level of consumer literacy which is quite high today, but nevertheless. So I cannot make a digital policy. And what can we do if the organization does not sign insurance contract and they switch me to different website? Can I stop agreement before time? And so on and so forth. So the questions which, on our understanding, are within the area that there is kind of legal practice created by Rospotrebnadzor as well, and there is court practice as well. And I would like to mention that today court practice in human right protection and in financial services as well is quite positive. Whatever we can say about complications connected with the court protection of consumer time frames, but 80% of all the cases of consumers are for the benefit of consumer. And in financial services, this indicator was, if I'm not mistaken, like 72% by last year, with so quite high level, just if we compare it with the experience of international arguments by financial and insurance ombudsmen in developed countries where this institute works for quite a lot of years. Normally it's 50-50. So it's a big question whether it's good for consumers to have this new financial institution, which we always supported and keep on supporting, because new channel of argument solution is very important. And it was rightly mentioned here that since the very beginning this institution didn't bring some misunderstanding by consumers, so that they would ask, why do we get finally? So to this background, at our experience, at the claims background from Rospotrebnadzor, which were addressed to insurance companies and which often are the same like those from Bank of Russia. And we have a situation when there is direct or indirect discrepancies with the current legislation, be it cancellation of making insurance agreement or non-payment with the consumer crediting and so on and so forth. Well, of course, all that is considered by us within the frames of our competences, our possibilities, the code about administrative rules and regulations. We are trying to control all the sections using all the opportunities that we have within the frames of civilian protection. These are protection of specific consumers, some circle of consumers, state bodies, and we soon hope to have a new opportunity, new process institution. This is collective protection of group of people. So if we speak about new law about financial authorized person, and we supported its adoption from the very beginning, unfortunately not everything which was mentioned there initially and implemented was created in the same way, but nevertheless we do hope that its realization will be in a positive way. And the thing that, first of all, we are talking about insurance companies when we will be talking about these arguments is described by objective fact that this sphere is mostly with the conflict between consumers and insurance organizations. On the other hand, when we are talking about in compliance with liability, we'll see how authorized person will work. We are ready to communicate and cooperate, and I should mention that far and away, not all the kinds of requirements can be considered by a financial authorized person. And it could be not right to say that we got total alternative to court protection of consumers. Consumers still have an ability to turn to court with a number of requirements which are not under the competence of financial authorized person, and with all the requirements that will come from the situation consideration. And it's very important here for insurance organizations and participants of the market do not to forget about this, so that they would assess it in a proper way, assess their own risks connected with the possibility of not following the decisions of financial authorized person, and also solution of arguments within civil legislation. It's very important for us. We always spoke about that court protection, which opens opportunities. It comes from the regulations of legislation for some kind of compensation on different basis, which is good in our opinion. And we are fighting, and we will be trying to oppose the logic which exists today, unfortunately, with some representatives of business, that this right of consumers should be limited by a fine in a pre-court order on moral damage and so on and so forth. All the spectrum of these institutions should be here, and their operation depends to a great extent from the loyalty of business, from readiness to go to protect consumer, and to how fair business model is arranged in this or that segment of the market. And we do not necessarily speak about insurance market here. And here, as I have already mentioned, a special segment of automobile insurance touches upon a lot of our citizens, and depending to how these relations are arranged on the principle of fairness and loyalty to consumer, on the principle of the desire to perform all the obligations and not refuse that, using also financial illiteracy of our citizens. These are very important things that, in my opinion, should be a basis for us to get this financial authorized person and to represent new institution which will work, first of all, for the benefit of consumers, and with its actions and these decisions will contribute to insurance market to develop in a civilized way, to develop for the sake of consumer, because anyway, all the businesses works exclusively for consumer.
This we'll try to believe in. Thank you very much for your farewell message. Thank you. Alexey Vladimirovich is here with us. Alexey Vladimirovich, we already started the discussion of possible ways to settle the conflicts between insurers, and I think it's very symptomatic, and that indicates the crisis of trust, of confidence, or maybe the confidence is not yet full. What is the vision of the Ministry of Finance, and do you see that there is a gap of trust, and what measures can elevate the tension between the parties? Thank you very much, Velina, for your question. And as usual, in your questions, you see the core of the problem, and I fully agree with you that this is the main challenge for us. The insurance companies believe that insurers are the crooks, while the insurance companies are referred to as the crooks as well, and that's the reality we live in, and we have to act in between and try to bring them together, try to them to reconcile, and that's why we organized this panel discussion. Because indeed the problem is large, the problem of trust is colossal. People buy policies, insurance policies, because they must buy them. However, the demand for voluntary insurances is not that high, and moreover, I can tell you that when you pay a small fine for mandatory automobile insurance, many people would prefer to do that rather than buy insurance itself. And we see still that we have a number of automobile cars. They do not have mandatory insurance, and of course its figure is not as catastrophic as in agriculture, where agricultural lands, a huge number of them, are not insured, and we understand that the majority of cars are insured, but if people believe it would be strange not to buy mandatory insurance, now it is quite a common behavior. And of course it is linked to the fact that as a majority, and that's what we feel as we communicate with the population, they believe, why would buy a policy insurance if the company wouldn't pay you anything, and it would be very time consuming and effort consuming. And the companies tell us, how can we check and recheck all the applications? That's what insurance companies say, because in many companies there are a lot of groups that fake the car accidents, that have agreements with this or the other officials. I'm not going to do any finger pointing, and then it causes court suing and so on, and we should protect our capital, our business, and we should try cut off such practices, especially if the government does not support us in this regard. Well, I think both sides are right, and yes, the government is to blame if they cannot offer good conditions for work that enable the sides to interact to each other efficiently. When we talk about a well-regulated market, when we talk about non-regulated market, it's another story, but we believe that it is a regulated market, and the surveillance should be organized in a way that people understand that even if two crooks come together, nothing will come out of it because the government will put an end to their plans. So far, I cannot say that our regulation serves to this purpose, and of course, it is a big problem. And that's why we organized this roundtable discussion, so that we pay attention to this issue. My answer is that we should go away from excessive regulation, because if there is too much crackdown, then all activities will be aimed at working around excessive requirements. And talking about mandatory car insurance, it's the most popular product. So on talking about this insurance, we went through various stages of development when we would make requirements more stringent. But now I think it's about time we should let the market settle everything and provide more freedom of action for the buyers and sellers of this insurance product, and that will provide the market with an opportunity to streamline all the practices. And as for voluntary insurance, of course, here, well, one must say the penetration here is really low, and it's going to improve only in future. Once we can streamline everything for mandatory insurance, we will improve the situation about voluntary insurance. What is heartening is the increase in the number of life insurance policies sold. Here we see the demand, and demand is constantly increasing. And of course, it is a sign that not everything is lost, and still there's a potential here. Talking about life insurance, they say it's one of the drivers for the upcoming 2 years. Alexei Vladimirovich, how about medical insurance? Any expectations in this regard? We are talking about voluntary medical insurance or insurance against certain diseases. How promising is it and interesting for the insurance companies? You know, I read a survey that was prepared by our analytical institutions, the High School of Economics and Russian Academy of Sciences, and they say that people are inclined to buy medical services where they would like to have large comfort or to buy consume high quality products. So there is a certain standard, but if they want to receive higher than this standard set by the government, they should pay for this. And I believe that this is a very good basis for increasing for enhancing voluntary medical insurance. And I think here we transfer from voluntary medical insurance to where the people buy to provide a high-quality medical service for themselves and their families. Of course, here there are many questions. And by the way, the global problem is that the insurance from the diseases that people fear most is not included in the medical insurance. So yes, you can buy insurance, but it will include that treating cancer. It will not be included in your medical insurance, and that's the most expensive way of disease to be treated. So the insurance companies try not to insure such diseases, and treatment here is very expensive, and people try to insure real estate, and especially in areas where natural disasters take place often. So I cannot give you ready-to-go solutions. A year ago, we discussed for the first time the necessity to revisit our approach to mandatory medical insurance, because is it insurance or not? It looks like just money transfers from one pocket to the other. And in order for it to function as a medical insurance, and the and insurance companies will be responsible for this, it has to the whole approach has to be reformed. And I cannot tell you that we already have any ready solutions. Now we will give the floor to Chistyukin Vladimir, who is the representative of the Bank of Russia. How can we cut the unfair practices when it comes to insurance activities? Well, sorry, allow me to talk in a broader sense. And we are talking about increasing trust of insurers. Thank you for reminding me this. Well, we should start with disclaimer. I fear that even if lots of efforts will be made by many sides, we won't be able to end up with a perfect solution. Why so? Because it's a rather complex segment, and here the relations between actors are different compared to banking sector, for instance. Here the conflict is in the core, and it all starts when an entity or an individual decides to buy an insurance as a service. And what does he face? So they pay the money for good, for myth. And this service, if there is no insurance case, will never be given. So if you go to a bank and you have a deposit, you will get back money and an interest. With insurance premium, it is very dubious, because you never know whether the insurance company will agree to pay you back or not. It's one conflict. And when insurers do not have any car accidents, or their houses do not get on fire, they think, okay, why would I spend money with, because it's a waste after all. So the second conflict is in the system of settlement, getting back to the bank deposit. So you bring your money to the bank, you know how much you will earn, when, at what point of time. The story is very clear here. Think of an insurance case, let alone you feel aggrieved because your car is broken, you cannot work, or maybe you got some traumas, and that already causes discomfort and instability. Then the insurance company tells you you will get your money back not when you need them, but when we check everything, and not what you hope, the amount you hope for, but the amount that is equal to the damage you incurred. And yes, psychologically, the party will not be satisfied, let alone a case when the insurance company acts as a charity. And in other cases, the consumer will not be happy, although no rights of his were infringed. So the idea of relations will cause excessive negative attitude to insurance companies. And we're not talking about any unfair practices or attitudes as well. Talking about fair practices, you need to instill fair practices and fair competition, and that will make insurance companies to provide better services, high-quality services. Do we have fair competition in the insurance sector? Not always. And we have all kinds of regulatory practices, and sometimes the tenders are won by the win the tender, and then part of the premium is paid to the person who organizes the tender, and that of course distorts the nature of competition. And thinking about insurance paid to tourist companies, here there are many unfair practices as well, but sometimes they are caused by legislation, and the system itself is built in a way that it settles favorable ground for getting insurance premium and paying nothing or paying minimum. And that happens again rather rarely, and there are many stories about competition, and here we can talk a lot about it. And I think the regulators as well as insurance community to change the reality for the better. And what is the role of their surveillance? The central bank is the body to ensure fair competition, and role is very important. First of all, we need to talk about traditional prudential surveillance. We need to watch the financial stability of the companies, and here we have two goals. First of all, we need to eradicate the insurance companies that practice that have unfair practices. Then we need to decrease the business risks so that we minimize losses of investors and creditors. This is what insurance surveillance does. And the obvious trend for us is implementation of the Solvency II mechanism. It's a European system of control over the capital and risks. And we hope by 2023, all in all, we will finish preparation for this system and we will be ready for full-fledged transition. But it is a basic story that will require the changes in the system of corporate governance, of risk management, of approaches to capitals, and changes in approach to all basic concepts that determine the financial stability of insurers. And it will also require a very serious change in the skills and competences of the employees working in the insurance companies and in the surveillance bodies as well. And I have talked about the crooked practices, and it is not only a problem of the owners of insurance companies, it's a problem of employees. We are talking about medium level managers without whose involvement the acts will not take place, and it's a problem of consumers who also engaged in such activities. I will talk about the basic story, and Lex already mentioned about it, when the consumers do not have mandatory car insurance, or they buy a fake one, and that means that they are already crooks de facto. So when I said initially about a natural conflict, right now we are developing a concept of counteracting this unfair practices in the insurance market. We started looking at various kinds of resources in other countries and see what attitudes the consumers have towards insurance practices, and their situation is not ideal. We looked at the surveys carried out by a German company called Emnick, and according to the results, 62% of German responders do not believe that such unfair deals are a crime, while the German Union of Insurers also had their own survey, and 21% of respondents said that providing false information to insurance to get larger payments is actually a small demeanor. So yes, many people believe that the insurance companies are crooks, so it's not a big deal to try to fool them. And even in countries where the issues of protecting consumers and is far developed, and it's a myth. So we have to eradicate such behaviors, and it's a evil that has to be rooted out. And my opinion is, as a person with legal background, I believe that here the punishment should be inevitable. And a good example is mandatory car insurance. We believe that we need to have cameras that will fix and track the policy availability, and we are very close to implementing the pilot project in Moscow. And yes, we need to find people in case they don't buy insurance. If they don't pay, if consumers do not pay fine, then we need to to limit them in other legal actions. So yes, this way the execution of laws will take place, and the price, excessive price of a policy should not be an excuse for not buying it. So for me, it is a complicated story. And so there is prudential surveillance behavior. Surveillance 2 years ago, central banks started paying attention to the following. And here we can learn a lot from our colleagues that has been protecting consumers' rights for a long time. So we started watching the quality of insurance services provided by the insurance companies. We are talking about assessing the insurance companies in terms of the quality of the services they provide. So let's see how the sale of electronic policy works, and how does the cooling period work? Is of information in full disclosed to the customer. It's very important, especially relevant when you buy a life insurance policy. And today we feel comfortable and quiet about a partners channel. It's a credit organization that provides full statistics, and are we confident that everybody who grants loans, do they feel confident about all the issues, and they just encourage people to buy insurance, and then we'll see how it goes. And I believe this is the general situation, and I believe these agents should be trained at a higher level, and they should understand the nature of each product. So the service of protecting consumer rights as central bank should watch the behavioral surveillance.
While performing retail insurance, behavioristic aspect is of no less importance than sustainable insurance companies. And well, in this respect, it's possible that much more considerable role can be given not to regulatory acts and laws, but the standard of self-controlled organizations, self-management organizations, when insurance community actually limits itself in its activity, in competition, in order to create unified rules of the game and thus better protect consumers. Well, exactly in the same way, the next aspect of increase of trust, this is provision of availability. I'm not going to speak about it in detail, but it's quite obvious today that this is high technology. This is one-click story, and we need to solve this question step by step. And not last year, but the year before, I forgot. Well, there was a roundtable on financial and technical insurance, and we are at initial stage, and we have to do a lot to switch from paper to something really technological, which will really increase availability of financial services, and in turn will make insurance companies quite federal companies which sell services to anyone. And based on all that, we must popularize insurance. So activity on popularization of insurance, on increase of level of financial literacy, this should be done altogether, but actually this is kind of additional thing to the basis that I have mentioned, and with that I'm going to stop. Thank you very much. After you have specified the intentions, I would like to ask about possible consequences. If by the results of last year 30 companies left market, and then 16 gave licenses voluntarily, and others were taken away licenses from by the central bank, whom are you going to close and ask to leave the market? I cannot answer this question. It's impossible. We never make forecasts of this kind. We always fight for every existing company in the market, so that even in case they have complications, the owners, the managers would try to find a way out from this situation. But it's quite obvious that not everyone can say that they successfully can solve these problems. Of course, somebody will leave the market, but for us it's obvious that it's much less important history than the stories that happened the last 3 or 4 years. But how do you estimate the forecast on reduction from 216 companies to 167? And who makes this forecast? The KPMG, I believe. Well, how do they know that? My God. Well, I can say one thing, that there is quite considerable challenge for insurance community, but not for the next year, but starting with the year 2020 will be the implementation implementation of norms of regulation, about increase of capital size. Well, according to our assessments that we have already provided public, approximately 125 companies will not satisfy final requirements on capital, which should be realized until the end of 2022. We switch to increased capital since 2020. For these companies, they have the moment of truth to find new investors or perform consolidation of companies in order to increase capital level and thus to meet the requirements of legislation. What will happen as a result, we'll get to understand better closer to 2020. And if auditors do not know that, they can guess. I have a question to insurers. Mr. Ufimtsev, Vice President of Insurance Alliance, till 2016, the locomotive of insurance company was automobile insurance, and as we have already mentioned today, now mostly we're talking about insurance of life. And what does it mean for companies? What it means for you personally for changing in strategy, tactics, and forecast? Well, good afternoon, dear colleagues. This is not a novelty. The whole world and the whole international insurance experience show that insurance of life is the most comprehensive, the largest market, which until now was not properly realized in Russian Federation. And finally, well, every year we promised that we'll start developing that, but finally we reach this market. We enter this market. The tempos are quite high, but we grow from zero. That is why it's so fast. So this is a very well forecast tendency which finally happened, and we must work with that. So I believe that the motor insurance will be the second, but a very strong and socially important kind of insurance. I believe that medical insurance, which also takes one of the main positions in the world, in Russian Federation has kind of underestimated meaning and position, should come after the life insurance, and automobile insurance should become the tool to be developed. Well, I would like to say a few words about trust of insuring companies. After I heard all the speakers, I do respect everyone, but I would like to address, now we have journalists here as well, and probably one of the tasks on increase of trust of insuring companies is that we would like to be sometime praised by state bodies, to praise insurers and communities. So we heard a lot of criticism, and sometimes fair criticism, and to some objective economical reasons occur. But when we start finding out stage by step, we understand that self-regulating organization in the financial market, it doesn't present in bank market, but it's in insurance market. I see the work on payment, compensation payment. Companies or banks leave markets, regulated things which are realized make it possible for consumer after the leaving of insurance company to understand who did it. And electronic insurance, we sold 10 million. So in European countries, we didn't face this breakthrough. We had to invest, and we had to meet the requirements of legislation, the requirements of regulator, the desires of consumers. Now we're overcoming state bodies, because actually now when we cooperate with state bodies, we have a task within 20 minutes to finish insurance agreement, but we will answer in 6 hours. And then they tell us that the consumer cannot get convenient service. So then I will have a request to regulators, to mass media. I believe that insurance community is a very well-arranged community, doing a lot to protect consumer rights, which due to its, I believe, complicated things and approaches, when people pay money for God knows what, they have high expectations, increased expectations, and in this complicated and serious market, insurance companies do a lot for self-regulation, and in order to increase trust of citizens, you should describe these positive aspects, because there are a lot of positive things that I would like to mention. And actually, switching to the very problematic issue, I would like to say that this very Russian unit of insurance companies, the standards which were adopted now and which are basic, like basic standards on consumer right protection. Well, there we have a quite detailed description of what is necessary to be done, how it should be done for the insuring company, which are the rights of a consumer, and what can be done while turning to insurance organizations to protect its own interest in our self-regulated organization, control functions, and institution of ombudsman. Well, I can say that second day after appointment of ombudsman, we asked for the meeting, and we said that being insurers, we are ready to be the first one on a voluntary basis to make an agreement to get connected to start working with ombudsman. And well, as to increase of trust, I believe that insurance community is doing a lot, and we will continue this work further on. We are really willing to have support from state bodies, and we would like to have not only a criticism but also a fair recognition of our successes. And I should say that some things which for today are just input through self-regulation and protection of mistrust of insuring companies will say on in the nearest future, and all the possibilities that consumer has, well, starting from the period of chilling down, which, and I would like to remember that the first of those were insuring companies who implemented that, and other things, all that increase trust. So in my opinion, for today, Russian Union of Insuring Companies and other unions are ready to increase trust of consumers, and as soon as we see some problems which occurs, we are trying to react to that as fast as possible. We had a problem, a lot of growth on insurance, and KBM Plus system works, and now we see at stable level, this complaint level is a stable one. So we had a problem for insurance agreement, and now the consumer can work with this with their claims faster, and of course we have performed all the requirements and satisfied all the needs, and the system of redistributions which makes it possible to work even in problematic regions where they are not interested from economical basis to buy insurance agreement. And anyway, we'll continue doing that. We believe that standards and self-regulation which is implemented in Russian insurance market very actively is a very correct thing, and I believe the insuring companies are doing a lot to protect consumer rights and increase of quality of their services, and we do hope that the vectors that have been indicated in liberalization of automobile insurance tariffs and other directions will contribute to that, because insurance companies will have more opportunities and more chances to provide a qualitative service for consumer. Well, thank you. Thank you, Evgeny Vladimirovich. I will get feedback right away. Dmitry Yanin, International Confederation of Consumer Community, Independent Monitoring. And please share the results, the conclusions, and what kind of problems you found out, actually. Thank you very much. Well, first of all, I would like to congratulate Yuri Voronina with his appointment. As a person who worked in healthcare, I know that your experience in Ministry of Healthcare and realization of quite important initiatives like anti-tobacco law, at which we work together, will help to bring insurance markets and other markets into such human conditions, and will increase the level of trust, because here we remember the cries when banking sector was actually indignant. How another healthcare institution, Rospotrebnadzor, was through the highest court, through convention of judges in highest court, or explain this. These are consumer right protection, and there should be general rules that say that people in white robes came to check the bar. So we do need white robes here, which would make this market healthy. As to trust, well, there is a benchmark of bank trust level. You know the level of banking sector trust around 60%, insurance fluctuations around 30%. So you have to work and not to fall down to the microfinancial organization trust. There is only 5% level, so there is somewhere to fall, but I hope you won't fall that much. What is done? I would agree that the market is more normal, and if we consider that the unions, but for bringing the important law. I would like to congratulate you about the law of ombudsman. We understand why this law was adopted, and the insurance community was very interested in that. The consumer lose the right to address to court without ombudsman. This was motivation of insurance community. You've done that, and I do hope that this solution will not much harm the consumers, but that will depend on Yuri Voronin and his colleagues. Well, this period which is deprived from the consumer for addressing to court. As to trust, the key position for trust when is honesty. Well, I can say that, in my opinion, it's very nice that central bank started reading insurance rules very carefully for key products. And when we started writing, you have to come into banks for loans, our anonymous buyers, and getting from there with insurance, because they didn't have a chance to take a loan without insurance. So a human believes that this is a protection, and what to do with that. When we read rules, we found terrible things: discrimination of pregnant women, all the social vulnerable groups. If this is imposed insurance, if there are complications on delivery, so for AIDS, people with AIDS, taken away from insurance company, disabled people of the first and second group. We do not touch upon the theme of people with cancer and chronic diseases, but for three categories: pregnant, disabled people of the first and second groups, and people with AIDS. Two federal laws of 1995 which prohibit otherwise to limit their rights, but for the federal law. There are terrible discrepancies in insurance. We're happy that State Council heard us and that there were some orders, and in October we'll check. There are journalists here, and we'll check all the rules where we saw these discrepancies with automatic exception from payments of separate categories of citizens. Please consider the rules carefully. The second thing, of course, we need to expand the institution of chilling down period for some products up to 30 days, for loan products more time. As to investment insurance of life, 30 days. As to insurance for life, medical insurance, 30 days. And also a liquidation of all these discrepancies which can be used by representatives of collective programs. I read explanations of Ministry of Finance, but I'm sorry, guys. Now, Ministry of Finance actually is very calm about how clearly it is described that if you bought insurance yourself, you can cancel it. But if you are joined to some program, then you have to, you cannot reject this program. And you cannot quit this program. And I believe everybody understands perfectly well that a human, regardless how this thing was sold separately or altogether with something, a person must have a right to get rid of the product he doesn't need, and the problem must be solved. Further plots the paradigm of self-regulation. I heard it from central bank. I believe that actually this is going kind of by stages, but if we consider our colleagues from Great Britain, when Ruski Standard entered the market, we could see how it's going to finish. Consumer credit loaning. And so this is a British model. Everyone who enters gets a card. So the same thing here. We were watching what's going to happen with self-regulation. The regulators in Great Britain do not consider self-regulation as efficient mechanism of consumer right protection. Here we need careful work of a state body for the purposes of reading these rules and understanding of information and revealing the information about the product. We saw your standard on consumer right protection, and I would write some things in a brighter manner. For example, if you buy a product which is, let us say, disguised for as deposit, so you sell it altogether. So put down within a frame, as well as in the cigarette packs. Pay attention. This product is of a high risk. It's not included into the system of bank accounts insurance. So we can make the same pictures and then sell this beautiful insurance because this is not included. And if you do not have any supporting mechanism, then sell them. So there should be warnings which are lacking in standard. It's written very beautiful, but without details. There should be special scripts, special frames, special pictures, so that for a person who is buying that, everything could be clear and he would understand that he is protected from that and not protected from that because he belongs to chronic disease, he is disabled of the second group, he has diabetes, and so on and so forth. Of course, you will sell the insurance to him, but you must explain in special script that under any conditions he will not realize this insurance. And this work for bringing insurance practices in honest manner. So honesty is very important here, and liberalization, of course. Of course, this experiment with liberalization of automobile insurance can be very interesting. And I believe that the only thing for this liberalization to be started in regions, just as kind of experiment to see what is going to happen with the prices. Because if there is liberalization and it results in the double cost of insurance agreement, well, this is a real risk. And if we start doing those things, it could be interesting to see, first of all, well, for 2 or 3 years, you give it to 15 subjects of the Russian Federation, and you see how market mechanisms are working. And finally, you see that all those things do not work. So tariffs increase, quality decreased, and so on and so forth. So here we have a good message, but actually there is kind of splash of consumer expenses on selling insurance, on buying insurances. I wouldn't like to see that, even if the quality of insurance of service is better. And the last thing I would like to mention, well, we digressed from the thing about fraud and client. There is a phenomenon of Russian market of automobile lawyers. Nobody likes them here, I believe. Why this market occurred? This market occurred as a result of overall decrease of the cost of damage.
When the insurance companies, by assessing the damage, would decrease the size of payments, and people that would come to car dealers, they would see what they get based on the mentor insurance is insufficient, and that's why so many allegations took place. So why don't we keep away from the same mistakes and let's not stimulate some financial mechanisms and techniques, and let's provide good and simple services related to reimbursement based on the insurance you bought. Thank you very much, Dmitry Dmitrievich. Let us thank Alexei Moiseyev for the participation. Unfortunately, he has to leave us. And I would like to invite Alexander Shaikin. Thank you very much. Alexander, I would like to invite you to take my seat, although I don't recommend that you sit. That will be an insurance case, right? He is the head of the research facility in the area of insurance, and you have some surveys and results, right? Yes. Hello. Hello, dear colleagues. Can you hear me? Hello, dear colleagues. May I ask you to show this next slide? So in 2018, our scientific research facility, based on the order of the Ministry of Finance, carried out a survey related to great availability of insurance services in the Russian market, and our survey was dedicated to this subject. We looked at activities at certain state bodies, agency, and the insurance market players. And also we looked at activities of these communities that protect consumers' rights. And also we studied the attitude of expert communities that included analytical centers, laboratories, and so on. So we say that recommendations are very multiple. And here in this presentation we would like to show you recommendations received from analysis of data in open sources, and we are a scientific organization. And another thing, whatever we report here does not mean to be exclusive information, and we are not the authors of this information. We're just an organization that can get data from various sources, and we can come to same conclusions as other bodies and agencies. So the first statement I would like to share with you. So talking about modernization, upgrading the definition of an electronic insurance policy. So there is an electronic insurance policy that is given based on a certain technology. So in all other cases, you have to hand it to the insurance holder, or you need to deliver it by post using the methods that allow to identify the recipient. In some cases, we say that once the agreement is concluded or when the agreement is prolonged, so in some cases, to make the insurance service more available, it makes sense to that the initiating actions will be not on the part of the policyholder, rather on the part of the insurance company. And then in some cases you can grant the policy based on two activities. First, the policyholder pays for the insurance, and then from his email address he can send a letter with certain content confirming that the policy was received and that he agrees with terms and conditions, and he's going to use this insurance service. So we say that additionally to payment, you need insurance holder needs to send a letter of confirmation about receiving the policy. Another thing. So next slide, please. The proposal number 2. Now there is a question of making voluntary medical service insurance more affordable and available. So when we did our survey, we realized that the insurance companies, we actually identified 2 companies that offer individual policies for voluntary medical insurance for individuals from the market. So without linking to special sales channels or linked to buying other services and so on, we understand the idea of medical insurance is that the probability of for medical case to take place is around 100%, and that's the way it is. So you need to reduce the cost of voluntary medical insurance, and one of the obvious options is a combined payment from voluntary and mandatory insurance, medical insurance. So if the service is not fully covered by mandatory medical insurance, it should be covered by voluntary medical insurance. And if the cost is of the service is high, that based on the norms and standards of mandatory insurance, it should be partially covered by mandatory insurance and partially by the customer. And we believe that in that case the mandatory insurance companies will not run out of money. And third slide. Another thing, it's not so global, but we believe that it can be helpful indeed. That is the simplified mechanisms of coinsurance. Coinsurance is getting more popular, and while I think there are no problems in this regard. But if you follow the law closely, you will see that each insurance company, each insurer must develop their own rights, insurance terms and conditions. And the question is, whose rules will be dominating in developing core insurance contract. And we understand that insurers have to conclude agreement that are not always in line with the laws. So rules of one insurers are taken and then they will dominate, or some more complex techniques will be used that will be confusing for individuals and for entities as consumers. So it would make sense to legalize the options when core insurers will conclude an agreement based on the rules of one insurer. And I think it will not infringe the principles and rules of insurance, and basic tariff and adjustment coefficient should add to the stability of the insurance company. And proposal number 4 and number 5, we are also working on them, and we understand there are certain issues related to them, and so let me voice them. Limitation of premium or commission. We know that some insurances are high margin and low margin, and we remember when mandatory insurance was had high margin, there was a large commission, but we also believe that the joint commission for this type of insurance could exceed 10%. So, as for voluntary insurance, here you cannot rely only on the limit given by the agency. It makes sense to come up with a structure that limits all the commission for all services like consulting, marketing services, and so on. And it will make sense to make sure that distribution channels will not be killed. So a great deal of discussion is to be followed. And we understand it also makes sense to eradicate agency commission based on the results of competition procedures. We are talking about procedures linked to federal law number 44, and we understand that it has indirect effect on financial availability because it is a premium. If it is paid, it is paid with the agreement of certain participants of tenders, and the cost of agency commission can be increased. This is it. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you very much. And closing remarks from Kirill Portov, Deputy Head of the Department of Property of the City of Moscow, and we would like you to share your experience in ensuring the housing sector, and we understand that this decree is signed and your experience can be extrapolated to other regions. So can you share with us what is going on in Moscow in this regard? Hello, dear colleagues. I represent the Department of Municipal Property. This is an executive body in the city that is in charge of implementing the insurance, property insurance program in the city of Moscow. And of course, we do not develop certain institutions within the institution sphere as my colleagues. We are positioned closer to the consumers and we execute a function of communication between the insurance company and the citizens that buy insurance, housing insurance. In terms of increasing confidence, it should be, and for the programs to be successful, it makes sense to stipulate certain items in legislations, and in that case, there will be certain budget responsibilities and certain costs on administrating the processes and regulating those processes. But also they will assume the responsibilities stipulated by law. So there are certain guarantees for the citizens when there is a subject and you have well stipulated norms and obligations, you feel more comfortable, and then on a monthly basis you can pay, and it's a very convenient tool for the insurance companies. Once you're executing bodies, you get an access to consumer and you can offer cheaper product of more flexible tools. Our program has been in place since 1995. It is rather old. It has been changed substantially. We constantly modify it, and of course we change it for the better in our opinion for the car insurance companies as well as for the customers. As of statistics, right now 2.5 million objects of real estate are covered by the program, and if you think that Moscow registers 6 million real estate objects and 4 million are flats, then it means that 62% of Moscow families are involved in this program. And of course, we are very happy about these figures, and of course, that demonstrates not only efficient work of executive bodies, but also good performance of insurance companies that are always open and feel very responsible when any of the insurance cases take place. As for 2012, we had 6 insurance cases, and the overall amount of payments was around 200 million rubles, and that includes budget funds, and we co-finance these programs, and right now we are at the level of 15% of insurance payments, so about 20 million was paid from the budget to compensate for these losses, and we have not always been that available. So back in 1998 we had only 8,000 participants in this program, and due to the budget we co-financed 80% of insurance payments. As of today, we can say that 2.5 or 2.5 real estate objects included in the program, and co-financing is at the level of 15%. So that happened due to consistency of some rules, and thanks to the fact that program is supported, and we try to provide support to all the consumers till getting the final results until the point when the premium is finally paid. So how did we provide the availability of this program? Most importantly, it had to be an easy entry for the agreement. So insurance companies, as of today, send insurance certificates, and the citizens can pay insurance as they pay for their utilities on a monthly basis. That's one thing. So by including this line in a payment document, we made this service more available. Secondly, today the insurance amount is very modest, so it's 1.79 rubles per meter. So if your apartment size is 59 square meters, so you pay over 1,000 per year, and this is something what all families can afford. And we believe that as of today we have a very good amount of insurance compensation, 40,000 rubles per 1 square meters, and that means that you can receive very good compensation and cover your repair expenses. We also include in the insurance any problems from man-made disasters or natural ones, and so this is all included in the program, and this way we provide a large spectrum of insurance tools. So in this particular case, we would like to inform you that regions today have a great tool, and by interacting with insurance companies and by demonstrating responsibility on all parts, on all the sides, you can increase the confidence and trust of citizens when it comes to real estate insurance. Hopefully the regions will take a good use of these tools, although it depends on paying capacity of consumers and of course on a possibility of insurance companies to convince the consumers. So we have 5 minutes and you can address your questions to the participants of discussion. Yes. Could you please tell me, give me the list of the participants of this program, and how often do you update it? Once every 3 years? Yes, and what if research is carried out and the list is the same? This year we have lost 2 companies and only the largest players are included in the list, and they are trusted.
Please, other questions? Good afternoon. A question to Mr. Voronin. Could you please say, I read in information financial ombudsman who will be present at financial market, at insurance market, will be paid by insurance companies. And how is it possible that his decisions will not be dependent upon someone elementary? Well, actually, we pay not for the results of the case, but regardless of that, and the differentiation depends on formula, which is described in law, depending on the number of complaints to this or that of organizations, and depending on the result, whether the case is won or lost. So this will be corrected by the results of the next quarter, and that is why companies which are making most mistakes, they will pay more. Those who actually reject correct complaints of consumers. This is a normal service when a person, normal practice when a person pays fee for some service. It is practiced in different spheres, in court as well. When people pay a court fee, it doesn't mean that they pay for the positive decision for them. Of course not. And the same is here. Central bank starts service, starts its activity at the initial stage, and then as soon as it's developing, it comes for self-payment, and it will be provided by the means of financial organizations. For citizens, the services of ombudsmen will always be free. This is also an advantage of this institution. Other questions, please? Well, as there are no more questions, we can finish discussion. I thank you, and I hope that today's meeting actually increased the level of trust between insuring companies and clients. Thank you.
Спасибо.